Morning, everybody. Let's get things moving. My name is Tom Williams, Programs Director with the International Water Association, IWA. IWA is the largest global network of water professionals covering the whole water cycle. And I'm delighted to welcome you here on behalf of IWA, but also on behalf of the International Solid Waste Association and OECD. The context of this side event is cities. The topics are waste, solid waste, and also water. And the issue that we're going to be looking at is climate financing. It's been very apparent to me during side events and other sessions during the last couple of weeks here at COP that the role of cities is becoming increasingly important as leaders as it relates to the Paris Agreement and climate change. We are seeing the increasing importance of water during the negotiations and discussions. For example, over 90% of the NDCs include some actions related to water for adaptation and an increasing recognition of water playing a role for mitigation. Solid waste, less so. I think it's still perhaps on the periphery of some of the discussions, but part of today's side event is trying to present to you some of the opportunities that we have with solid waste. So the side event really wants to reaffirm the importance of city leadership, highlight the opportunities there are for water to contribute to both adaptation and mitigation, and also look at the potential of the waste and the resource sector. And with this in mind, we also want to go into detail about climate financing for both water and waste, and some of the opportunities and bottlenecks faced by cities, local authorities, and utilities to actually access some of that financing. When we think of this shared agenda, so cities, water and waste, I think we should be very conscious in the context of the SDGs of some of the targets and their complementarities, their potential conflict. Some of the examples I have on the screen are targets taken from the 5 goals you see at the bottom. But for example, if we're going to achieve universal access to safe water and adequate sanitation, if we're going to reduce by half the amount of untreated wastewater, that means we need to build a significant amount of infrastructure. How do we actually build that infrastructure without compromising some of the other SDGs and particularly compromising some of our climate goals? We should also recognize some of the opportunities for synergies between these targets. For example, some of the potential synergies in solid waste and also wastewater. When we start to look at climate financing, this is from 2014 data, and this is just public climate financing. But you can see on the adaptation side that water is quite high. On the mitigation side, water is embedded in some of these other sectors, and you see waste very low down there in the green on the right-hand side, as you see it at the very bottom of financing. And I think to characterize the flow of financing, we need to look at cities, local authorities, water and wastewater utilities. And part of today's session is really going to look at some of the bottlenecks and opportunities that these entities have in accessing climate financing. So to take you through the agenda, we're going to have 3 scene-setting presentations, looking at cities, looking at the waste sector, and looking at the urban water sector. We're then going to have 2 panel discussions. First of all, we're going to look at the financial resources and instruments for low-carbon, climate-resilient water and waste infrastructure. And the second panel is going to look at how we can actually create a pipeline of bankable projects for waste and water that we can actually realize this ambition of low-carbon, climate-resilient cities. And then just before 3 o'clock, we'll have some closing remarks. So we have a very busy agenda, 3 parts, some scene setting, and then 2 ensuing panel discussions. I'd like to now invite our 3 presenters to come to the podium to take a seat. Gary Crawford, who is a board member of the International Solid Waste Association and Vice President of International Affairs at Veolia. Jorge Wolpert, who is the Executive Director, Urban Development, Land and Housing, Ministry of Agrarian, Territorial and Urban Development in Mexico. And Tadashi Matsumoto, who is the Senior Policy Analyst at the OECD. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Tadashi to come to the podium and present on urban planning and climate proofing.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Tadashi Matsumoto, representing the OECD. As a co-organizer of this event, I thank you for your participation and thank to the co-organizers of the event. My contribution today, I have 4 key points that I like to raise. So first one is that the urgency of this work, cities, solid waste, and water, especially urbanization. While we are talking about emerging economies, and urbanization produces or provides strong potential for growth, for environmental sustainability, but this window is rapidly closing. Secondly, policies, and we just like to flag up, well, there are many aspects of important policies, but today I really like to focus on land use, the importance of land use. Then the governance, obviously, maybe the OECD has been working on this governance part, with the most, focus, and especially multi-level governance aspect would be important because we are talking about cities today. And then finally, I would like to propose the importance of national urban policies. And, this has been discussed in Quito at the Habitat 3 conference as well. And this would be one of the pillars of the OECD work from now. So those are the issues that, quick overview of this presentation today. The first slide I like to show is about, what urbanization can bring to cities. Of course, we are talking about, challenges of urbanization, but I just like to focus a little bit on the positive side of urbanization, let's say. Because as you see, this graph is showing the relationship between urbanization. I see. So the horizontal axis is countries are urbanizing, it's urbanization level. And the horizontal, the vertical axis is talking about the income level of a country. So this is the let's say progress of countries from 1970 to 2005. Yeah. So let's see one country, which is Korea, as you see. So Korea is one of the successful example, which urbanization was accompanied with income growth. So it was one example. As you see, let's say Brazil here, urbanization was happening in the last 25 years or 30 years, but in terms of the income level, it didn't, well, it's relative terms between with the US income. So, the income level, of course, grew, but it's not as expected or as desired. And what can this, what brings this difference? That's a very important question to address for the countries which are now urbanizing. As you see, Thailand, India, this is based on 5 country studies of the OECD, by the way, in Southeast Asia. So I plotted Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, and so on. So for countries who are currently urbanizing, it's really important to see, the different path. Some country may grow their incomes as urbanization grows. Some country may not be able to do this, and very important to think about this difference. The second point I like to mention today is about this opportunity. So there are a lot of opportunities, as I see, as we saw from the previous slide. But as you see, so this is again the case of Asia. So Asia's urbanization is peaking right now in 2015, 2020. But as you see, this urbanization is now, slowing down from 2030. Say. Well, there are differences, of course, by country and countries, but the important point is that urbanization is happening right now. People are talking about the big challenges and so on, but this, will not last for let's say centuries. So it's, very important to see this, timing issue. And we are talking about infrastructure and public service delivery, and it, as you all know, it will take time to provide, to prepare this infrastructure. And in this case, in this regard, it's very, very important to act right now. So this is urgency issue. We also need to learn from some countries which already experience this urbanization. This statistics is from the OECD study on urban governance in cities, and which is a result of the 48, the survey to 48 OECD and non-OECD cities. As you see, maybe we can name the two first issues which are really in their concern of the 48 cities. The first one is the aging and outdated, obsolete infrastructure. So this is a result of, of some type of urbanization, because, as the city mature, and it's not the phase of new investment, infrastructure investment, but it becomes more on a maintenance side of the public infrastructure maintenance. Then it becomes, this cost issue becomes really, let's say, a burden to city and central government. And the second issue is about extreme event. So, when you prepare your infrastructure, when you invest in your infrastructure, some countries may have not been well prepared for extreme event or urban resilient issues. Then it again becomes costly to address this issue. So again, I like to link this issue with this urgency issue. So once you pass the right timing to act or to invest in infrastructure and to get it done, it will become really costly, and it becomes rather impossible to address these concerns. Infrastructure maintenance is really a prominent example, of the importance of right planning and right investment. The next slide is, now I'm talking about policy responses, what policies are important. And this is also a framework that OECD is proposing. We call it 3 Ps, people, policies, and places. I would just focus on, well, everything is important, but focus on places because we are talking about cities. So cities is a place that people and policies, let's say, meet each other, and we are creating policies around that places. So cities must be the central to the solution. We just compare to, let's say, top-down approach and place-based approach from cities. So cities is, first of all, the place which generates most of the economic growth, as you all know, and also it creates, most of the environmental externalities. And so that's why cities needs to be involved in any sense in this discussion. Secondly, this is a number from the OECD countries, but actually in practice already, cities account for 70% of public direct investment and 50% of public procurement. That means that, all the public money, among all the public money being spent in the OECD countries, majority of it are already used in, local government. or subnational government. So, this is just showing that the importance of addressing the issue of local government as a national government issue, and then coordination between central government and local government, how to use this public money in a more effective way. Final point, the third point is about multiple local benefit. So compared with sectoral approach from the central government, we believe that the local government can do better in terms of combining different objectives or sectoral, needs or objectives together and create synergies and complementarities. This can be, explained by different examples. Local, transport is one issue. Water approach is also, and solid waste. We have a lot of examples on this, how local government or city-based approach can create more, let's say, synergies and complementary approach, and this can reduce cost of, investment. Finally, I have a few more slides. I'm mindful of time, of course. This is a little more deep dive to the city, the policies which we like to promote. First point, yes, of course, when we are talking about local benefit, it has to be coherent with national policy goals, because national policies will affect local outcomes. Local policies will affect, of course, the national outcome, and the dialogue between the levels of government would be really important to create this coherence. Otherwise, they will work separately and create different results, which could sometimes be contradictory with each other. Second point is about demand side policies, the importance of demand side policies. We are talking about financing today, and of course, it's important to come up with innovative solution for financing, but in the first place, as a public policy, we really need to think about how to reduce or how to curb the investment need or financing need. In this sense, demand side policies, for example, pricing mechanisms would be really important tool to address. And then land use would create very important synergies across the sectors. As I already explained, infrastructure investment would be really dependent on how you build cities. So compact cities are now becoming very, very popular concept. It's not only density, but actually, how you use your land more effectively could affect very much on the performance of your infrastructure investment or cost of the infrastructure investment, including the maintenance. So I think I would stop here. The last slide actually is a bit of the promotion of the OECD work. We are working on water governance initiatives and other dialogue sessions to create a coordination mechanisms among stakeholders on water issues. On urban development, we are also working on this coordination of across levels of government in climate investment, and we are trying to start a new study on looking at several countries, how subnational and national coordination works well, or how it's working, and then we try to give some recommendations. So, if your countries are interested in this study, please contact me. And finally, national urban policies. So as I said, in Quito, OECD launched a new program on national urban policies. It's called the National Urban Policy Program. And this is also to support several countries who are interested in developing or renewing national urban policy, because it creates really important dialogue mechanisms between national and local government. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to have some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tadashi. And I think hearing here and hearing earlier this week that the decisions that we take and cities take today around policy and investments really will determine the trajectory of low carbon, climate resilient futures. So I think that really underpins the important role that cities have to play from a governance, policy, and investment decision. Okay, well, let's move on now to the second of our scene setting presentations, which is focusing on waste and resource management as a key sector to help achieve climate targets. And I'd like to introduce Gary Crawford, who is a board member of ISWA and also Vice President for International Affairs at Veolia. Gary, over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I think I can still say that. Yes, I have a minute or two to go, but good morning and thank you very much. I'm very pleased to participate in this side event, to be able to join together with the International Water Association, as well as the OECD, and as well as the interesting groups of panelists that are here, and Mexico representative with us today. And so I'm really pleased to be here. As noted, what I will be doing is presenting the waste and resource management, a key sector to achieve climate targets. I'm representing the International Solid Waste Association, ISWA, which is the world's largest network that promotes and develops professional and sustainable waste and resource management. Present in more than 90 countries, ISWA has a unique worldwide network in waste and resource management matters. And as noted, I also work for Veolia, which consists of over 179,000 professionals in 40 countries dedicated to designing and implementing the best possible solutions for local management of essential resources, water, energy, and raw materials. So let's get started. And what I'd like to just point out, reiterate, I guess, was really that we know that we have two major challenges facing us, and that's the rapid increase in population as well as urbanization. There are currently 7 billion people on Earth, soon to be 9 billion by 2050. With more than 50% of the world population already living in urban areas, it's expected to reach 70% by 2050. And with almost all the growth occurring in the developing world, the world's cities face really critical challenges in coping with the rapidly increasing volume of waste and the changing characteristics of urban and industrial waste. So it is important to really rethink the energy services, the water services, and how we deal with material flows in society. What we see is low and middle income countries still face major challenges ensuring universal access to waste collection, eliminating uncontrolled disposal and burning, and also moving towards environmentally sound management for all wastes. It is estimated that at least 3 billion people worldwide still lack access to controlled waste disposal facilities. And we see also, though, really we see emission reductions in our sector not only as possible, but having potential to create jobs, improve health, our environment, and communities. But the full potential really has not been fully exploited. And we believe that waste and resource management action should be in every country plan, or NDCs. Already we have proven cost-effective technologies that reduce or avoid greenhouse gas emissions and short-lived climate pollutants, which is black carbon and methane. And without getting into too much detail here or too technical, these technologies include turning organic waste into soil conditioner and fertilizer, avoiding landfill organic waste, or at a minimum capturing the landfill gas from the sites, or producing energy from waste to energy plants, biogas from landfills and anaerobic digestion. And of course, we really need to be working on preventing, reusing, and recycling waste. Using this transition to a circular approach, we think that 10 to 15% reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions could actually be achieved. In fact, in the last thinking, we really think that the entire economy needs to become circular. A new model would actually decouple economic growth from consumption. So instead of take, make, and dispose, we would see one person's waste becoming another person's resource. A circular economy would mean less need for virgin materials. This would help us reach the UN climate goals, but also reduce cost, increase jobs, and decrease potential risks and liabilities across supply chains, which is quite important. And I'll just note, according to a joint report that was done by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and McKinsey, emissions in Europe could be reduced by as much as 48% by 2030, 61% by 2050, by applying the principles of circular economy in the mobility, the food, and built environment sectors. The waste and resource sector would obviously play an important role in making this happen. So we see that with this, we've got a long way to go to get to this point. For example, we see that current material flows are still very linear. We see, for example, most plastic packaging waste is used only once. 95% of its value is lost after a single use. And we also see that 32% of the plastics are escaping collection, ending up in our oceans and urban drainage. However, the good news is that we do at the same time see some examples of closing the loop emerging. And I'd just like to show a few examples very quickly. But let me look at, for example, at this facility, which is in Germany, and it's converting 1 billion plastic bottles each year into flakes that are then used to make new bottles. Using recycled PET prevents around 70%, prevents about 70% of the CO2 emissions compared to standard virgin PET. And this facility results in more than 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalent of avoided emissions. The next one is in Hungary, and this is in Pech, the heating of the entire city is made from biomass, wood and straw. And the clean heating comes entirely from the biomass, preventing the equivalent of 150,000 tons of CO2 emissions each year. And then our last stop on this quick road trip is in Denmark. And this is a biorefinery that combines the strongest environmental technologies within water treatment and biogas in one significant full-scale demonstration project. The biogas generated is transformed into electricity and heat, and the nutrients are utilized in a very effective and odor-free organic fertilizer. Furthermore, the process actually opens up utilization possibilities of interesting byproducts such as phosphorus for fertilizer and biodegradable bioplastics. So a very interesting site here. I have to stop there, but we would have many more. But there are examples of showing that we're closing the loop and circular solutions are being implemented. So now what I'd just like to touch on is where's the money? But anyway, we'll hear more about that after in the panel discussions, but ensuring countries translate their climate plans or NDCs into progress will take massive financial investment. We're hearing a lot about this over the last 10 days, and that's not just taking into account, and that's not really taking into account the more ambitious NDCs that will follow. But in the long term, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this, is that this could be more than offset by new investment flows and innovation opportunities presented by a low carbon economy. A major barrier when it comes to waste and resource projects has been establishing bankable projects and access to finance. However, we do see that opportunities are there. In late 2015, we've heard that countries are taking developing countries are taking action by providing support to developing countries on greenhouse gas mitigation. We also saw where multilateral development banks announced new targets to expand climate finance initiatives, and the Green Climate Fund is now up and running for mitigation and adaptation projects. So, and there's many others, and we've heard about some over the course of the discussions these past 2 weeks. So there will be finance opportunities, and there'll be increasing numbers of investors looking in and interested in financing these low carbon projects. So innovative financing mechanisms and instruments, technology transfer from developed to developing countries, adequate regulatory frameworks, and so on, all will need to be scaled up in order to transform the waste sector into a veritable carbon sink. And when we talk about scaling up, we have the technology. We know it can provide significant reductions. We have shown that, and co-benefits. So how do we scale up these activities? And it's a real challenge. We see that support is being given to developing countries in the form of capacity building, technical and financial assistance, and work on creditworthiness. For example, ISWA is actually participating in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, the Municipal Solid Waste Initiative, as one of the lead partners, providing assistance to a network of cities that want to develop solid waste action plans, leading to bankable projects. We are working with over 60 cities. We committed to mobilize 150 cities by 2020 and to implement quantifiable actions and reduce emissions of short-lived climate pollutants, again, methane and black carbon, and to work with this core group of leaders, local leaders, to catalyze an additional 1,000 cities to do the same. On the next slide, I agree with Tadashi, who said it's urgent, there's really no time to waste, but really time is of the essence. And we know that the current national climate plans will mean about a 2.7 degrees Celsius rise, far above the 2-degree target. NASA has reported that 2016 will very likely be the warmest year on record. And so taking action on climate change is not only a moral imperative, but it's a massive business opportunity. And that is if we are open-minded to changing how we do things. It's really, we've already seen rapid progress and wins all around by thinking a bit differently about waste and resource use. And this is essential. So I'll just say in closing, I'd just like to highlight that the waste and resource management sector occupies really a unique position as a potential net reducer of greenhouse gas emissions and short-lived climate pollutants, while also, as I said, contributing to job creation, improved health, and reduced environmental impacts. So I'll leave you with that. I hope I didn't run over my time, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gary, for asking the critical question of where's the money. We'll come on to that response to that question in the panel discussions, but also introducing the circular economy framework. I think this is a way that we need to start thinking about integration across systems and across sectors. And of course, there's lots of touch points there on various climate actions. And I think when we think about the circular economy, we should also consider what are the market and the regulatory levers that we need to unlock transition to the circular economy from those different sectors and systems. Okay, moving on to our last scene setting presentation, which is going to focus on urban water cycle management in a low carbon future. I'd like to welcome Jorge Wolpert, who is the Executive Director for Urban Development, Land and Housing, Ministry of Agrarian, Territorial and Urban Development in Mexico. So Jorge, over to you.
Thank you indeed for inviting the Mexican government to this side event. I would like to start by saying that it has been for Mexico in particular very important to work alongside with OECD or OECD, not only in water management, but urban policies and of course, sustainable growth. So to our colleagues present here today, we tell you from Mexico that working, using the tools that the OECD produces has been very helpful for us to move forward into implementation of sustainable action. And of course, we, listening to the previous presentation, the composition of Mexico's NDC is interesting in that the first 10 years of implementation focus more on short-lived pollutants rather than on carbon. So the mix is 70% to 30% from 2020 to 2030, and then from 2030 to 2040 is 50-50, and then on the last phase towards 2050 it shifts the other way around. We have a high potential, as many of developing economies, of introducing cheaper technologies and battle that ground with short-lived pollutants. Now, at the urban sector, we are a urban country. we are the most urbanized country in Latin America, which is the most urbanized region in the world. But that sounds interesting if we go back to one of Tadashi's first slides, that not necessarily urbanization has meant growth in increasing the well-being of citizens. And that is the case in Mexico. Our cities have grown to the sides and using their urban soil in a very non-profitable and non-cost beneficial fashion. So we have very low densities and insufficient infrastructure, which also always ends up just being enough for a couple of households and not to promote compact, sustainable urbanization. So taking that into consideration, the Mexican government has developed some strategies towards sustainable the urban development. And of course, water is at the center of that strategy. We understand we are a very diverse country geologically. We have very arid zones and we have zones with a lot of rainfall. But even where rainfall is very high, the use of water and how we manage it in cities has not been successful and has not been sustainable. So we are in the process of integrating from the national urban policy a water tendency or a water concept on how to better manage it. So we understand we are a new ministry, the Ministry of Agrarian, Territorial, and Urban Development. We were created in this administration, but we, from the start, started to work transversally. So our coupling with the Ministry of the Environment has been essential in this issue. Also, well, we understand that carbon intensive methodologies of how to treat water and distribute it are a focus, a clear focus on how to mitigate. But we also believe that water does not need to be only translated into mitigation. To manifest the importance of investing in sustainable water management, we do not have only to rely on its on how it impacts positively climate action from a mitigation perspective or even adaptation. We definitely hope, and we have heard in many of our interventions in these side events, that the co-benefits of better using water have been discussed and addressed at different side events. We have to remember that water is essential in absolutely every aspect of human development and human progress. And we need to be aware that we do have a climate crisis, but it is to a big extent dependent or even related to poor water management. So, well, as I said, not only water is important, water efficient or sustainable water management for mitigation, but also it is important to look at it in a broader spectrum. Now, as I said, we are happy that it has been taken more into consideration in recent talks, and it accounts for almost 20% of the NDC's strategies that we have seen proposed by the countries that have ratified the Paris Agreement. And we, in Mexico, it accounts for even more than that. It is around 35% for our NDC is related to water-related interventions. Now, we understand in a country with a growing economy as Mexico, that the correlation with the stakeholders is crucial. We do have a national water commission in Mexico that depends on the federal level, but of course, from the constitution, as in many countries, it is more governed by the state or middle subnational authorities. And in the end, it needs to be well managed at the bottom by the municipalities. So the coordination between the three orders of government is essential if we want to better sustain water management. And utilities, which in Mexico and in many of emerging economies is public, is not private, needs to or entails a proper coordination between the levels of government. So governance is essential, and we have only actually been successful as a federal government when we engage and properly bring the private sector to accompany public interventions. When we talk about governance and how to better collect and treat water, we definitely need to shift our mentality, and that's what we are trying to promote in Mexico. The better way to do that is to raise concern between or in the population. People are pretty much aware of the importance of water. I mean, if you properly give or deliver the message to incorporate society into water discussions, they easily respond, even easier than with other aspects such as carbon mitigation. So the proper communication schemes with better sustainable water treatment is essential, as we have found out in Mexico. Optimizing the existing assets and innovating on future assets to deliver urban water services is important. The better use of rainwater, and of course, treating all waste water with a sense of recovering and reusing it is essential. Now, in Mexico, we have created or elaborated with the new urban agenda that was recently approved in Quito, an effort that is it's already taking place in some cities. It's called the Sustainable Cities Network. And in these cities, there are 8 cities in our country that are part of this network. But we are working together with the other levels of government and the private sector and the academia into bringing solutions that are that can put that city towards a sustainable path. And well, this is a list of the cities that are part of this network. We have 2 years left in this current administration, so we don't believe that the network will grow in the near future, because public investment is focusing more in these cities. And well, we don't have enough budget to make it a nationwide approach. So we are working with those local authorities, both at the state and municipal level, that are truly engaged. And we have seen a fabulous response from the international community. We are working with multilateral agencies and other governments in each of these cities. This also helps us to ensure that when either the local authorities go out because of elections or the federal administration, these projects will go on, will continue. So that is a good methodology to engage society into these projects. And also it becomes attractive to both the financial, the banking systems, and to the private sector. This is a strategy that we have we designed from September last year, in 2015. And it has really attracted a lot of funding from the private sector, and we have come a very long way. It is important just to say that the methodology is quite simple. It is based on governance, and it entices comprehensive planning, efficient management, urban environmental management, urban consolidation, public spaces, which are essential in cities, and of course, sustainable housing, where Mexico is a leader in the world promoting sustainable houses. Now, I'm only going to give 2 examples of what we are doing, but one of the cities is in the largest biosphere reserve in Mexico, which is Tehuacan Cuicatlan. So it covers from the state of Puebla all the way to the state of Oaxaca. And our strategy, we have been working there with GIZ and the German government in a sustainable urban environmental management, which not only focuses on the city, which is a mid-sized city, but also in the region and its surroundings, involving, of course, the civil society. On the urban consolidation part of our strategy, there is another, well, we use or introduce different instruments in each of these sustainable city projects. One of them is a very important one, which we presented here at COP22, which is the Urban NAMA. It's crediting, well, from what we have heard, the only crediting Urban NAMA currently being implemented or piloted globally. And well, it, of course, focuses on urban services, such as, of course, water, public lighting, waste management, which we have just heard is as important as the others, and transport. And, well, of course, we include that housing as well. Now, with regards to water in the Urban NAMA, we are piloting in the city of Nuevo Laredo, which is a border city with the United States. And it entails, it is a small project at first. It comprises 209 houses, but the land where it is, the polygon where it is occurring, will in the end have 4,000 homes. So we are piloting at the first stage of that development, and we are using an ecological Canadian technology for water management. So all water will be treated and reused for toilets in all cases. So this is costly, but the private sector was happy to engage into that effort of putting 2 lines of pipes so that water can go to the water treatment plant and come back to service the toilets. So the important part of this is that you were saying before about where is the money. And I remember just that yesterday there were some NGOs, people talking and actually shouting in the aisles, and they were making an allusion to one famous phrase from a movie that says, "Show me the money." And since really the important or most important part that we as a country have seen here at COP22 is that it's time to act now. It's time for implementation, and implementation will occur only when finance is in place. So this is a methodology complex in that it has to be implemented with many stakeholders at the same table, but the fact that you have many stakeholders in the same table and that somehow civil society is part of that table makes it easier for private sector to engage, makes it easier for the banking system to give loans. And we have seen it with a lot of success in a very short time. And for us, water is essential, of course, in these strategies. And we hope to give you more examples and very good news in the following months. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jorge, particularly for showing us that that policy dynamic between national level and city level governance, and also looking at how water plays a very strong role in climate mitigation adaptation strategies. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers for setting the scene. So thank you, Tadashi, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Jorge. And we're now going to move on to panel discussion. The original schedule for a panel discussion was to do it in 2 parts, but time, as always, is against us. So let's be creative and let's turn 2 panels into 1. So what I'd like to do is welcome our panelists to the stage. I'd first like to introduce Stephen Schonberger, who is a practice manager for Middle East and North Africa region with the World Bank. I'd like to welcome Jorge Gastelumendi, who is Global Policy Lead for the Nature Conservancy. Jorge. I'd like to welcome Lance Pierce, President of North America, the Carbon Disclosure Project. I'd like to welcome Lorenz Petersen, Head of Climate Change, Rural Development and Infrastructure Sectoral Department at GIZ. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Andrea Fernandez, who is Director of Governance and Global Partnerships at C40. Andrea's not in the room, but we have 4 panelists. That's enough to have a strong and meaningful conversation. Hopefully you've sorted out your name tag so you know who you are and you know who your panelists are. So we've set the scene in terms of how cities can be leaders in terms of driving climate actions. We've heard about the potential of the waste and resource sector in terms of contributing to that and the importance of water within that context as well. What we really want to dive into now is really looking at the financing, so the opportunities, the bottlenecks, and the various instruments that can actually enable cities, utilities, et cetera, to take actions as it relates to water and waste within a city context. And Stephen, maybe starting with you, what kind of numbers in terms of investments are required for water and waste over the coming 15 years? And what is the World Bank doing to support low carbon, climate resilient infrastructure investments?
Thank you very much. I mean, the numbers, we're actually working now ahead of the Budapest Water Summit on trying to put some numbers together on the needs. And of course, the numbers are really broad, but let's just say it's definitely in the hundreds of billions of dollars. They're big numbers no matter how we do it. You know, we're very much committed, and I was very pleased by the initial speakers. I mean, we do see that cities are going to lead the way. We have no doubt about that. I mean, mayors are often the most innovative people, at least in public society. And so we really look to the cities to inspire the rest of us. You know, I give an example. The late mayor of Sana'a, who was tragically killed in one of the recent bombings there, was one of the most innovative people about integrated water management I've ever met. He had never studied integrated urban water management. He just figured it out. He realized that given the water constraints in Sana'a in Yemen, he had to figure out how to work with farmers on groundwater management. He had to work with society, with his constituencies on wastewater collection and reuse. And he had to think about, you know, his own contributions to supporting the health of the aquifer through infiltration ponds. Now, he was helped by us, GIZ, Italians, many other supporters, but he had that concept and he was taking it forward. And again, this is, you know, in an extraordinarily difficult context. So I think, you know, we do look to cities and we are inspired by cities. And we've seen that in other cities in the developing world, such as Windhoek, Chennai, and others. So we're developing a water scarce cities initiative. One of the cities that we're working with is actually this beautiful city, Marrakesh, the Régie here, in terms of some ideas on how they can move towards this more circular approach. And I was very interested. I think we're all very frustrated. Wastewater, I think Gary correctly said these are resources, not waste. So we'll have to work on the vocabulary. In terms of the financing, you know, as Jorge kind of alluded to, you know, sustainable approaches to, and I'll focus on the water side because that's the part I cover. Sustainable approaches are increasingly becoming required by financiers, either public or private sector. We certainly, you know, aren't comfortable just looking at a wastewater treatment plant or a water treatment plant. We're increasingly working with the clients we work with, whether they be national governments or cities, on putting together more of an integrated water management approach as the basis and seeing how that specific investment fits in. We know that, you know, increasingly private financiers are doing similarly. We'll see increasingly bond raters, et cetera, doing similar things, because that is the sustainability of the city and its ability to continue to generate the revenues to service its financing. So that can be expected. Also, you know, even though cities are richer than most other parts of governments in most countries because they have dynamic economies, still the numbers required for financing are so far beyond what they can afford. We're going to have to move to leverage. Our own case, we're moving up. We've committed to 28% of our overall financing being very much focused on climate mitigation and adaptation. Of course, we and others will facilitate access to funds like the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Facility, green bonds, and others, but these will still be a drop in the bucket. And we very much believe, as Jorge and others have highlighted, that private sector financing has to come in. And just two things on private financing, and then I'll on. We'll always need some public financing for the public goods. We're not saying it all becomes private, of course, and that'll be for environmental goods, and it'll be ensuring that the poor have access to the services that they need. That's without doubt. The question is, how do we make sure that we're not crowding out those essential public goods because we're financing things through the public coffers and the Treasury that don't need to be, that we could leverage through the private side so that we can have more money for environmental goods and for financing the access of the poor to essential services. And also, I want to make clear that when we talk about private financing, we're not talking about privatization. The assets largely remain with the public sector. We're really talking about unlocking private access to innovation, to efficiency, and to financial resources. So the key thing for us is how do we leverage that in? And as the other speakers alluded to, clearly there's a need to realign the subsidies, the tariff policies, and the regulatory policies, because while there's a lot of money going into that, and they're not necessarily driving the utilities in the cities towards a more circular approach or a more sustainable approach. So we really need to review those very carefully to say, what kind of incentives are we providing to the cities, to the private sector, and others, so that they are moving in the right direction? Secondly, we're trying to help out through the de-risking, through the risk guarantees and other mechanisms, either through the World Bank Group, because we recognize that we're sort of brokering marriages now. The public sector, private sector are looking at each other. Water is always, the tariffs have been very low. There's little experience, not that much experience. Some of the experience has been good. Some of it's been quite difficult. So we're going to have to help take away some of that risk so that cities and the private sector can learn to work together in those areas of service delivery that really are where the private sector can add value in all of this. So for us, it's really about how do we get a leverage approach that allows the public sector to focus on the key elements of environment and access, while passing off to the private sector some of the financing, innovation, and efficiency that can help drive us in the right direction.
Thank you, Stephen. And Jorge, moving on to you, and Stephen introduced the notion there of financing for social and environmental goods. You work for the Nature Conservancy, really promoting, advocating, and taking actions for natural infrastructure, for example. What kind of climate resilient, low carbon natural infrastructure options are available for water and waste? And what are the innovative or not so innovative financing mechanisms to actually enable those natural infrastructure solutions?
Can you hear me? So, Tom, thanks for the invitation. And it's just mind-blowing for me that a conservation NGO is sitting with all of these presenters are, looking at macro level engagements, and at the national level, we would like to challenge you to think that when we talk about urban, we should go beyond the city boundaries. And you have two good news on that. If you expand your thinking, I don't know if you remember that last slide, one of the last slides in which you see the mountains on the back, and then you see a lagoon on the other side, and the water coming all the way to the city. We were focusing on the city itself and all the cost, all the energy efficiencies that you could get out of, treating better water. But it would be ideal if you actually include also that landscape that looks outside the city. The two pieces of good news is, first, you immediately acquire infrastructure. Immediately. Of course, that infrastructure might not be in the best shape, but you could actually work with it. So the first good news is that, and why is that a good news? Because the natural infrastructure, that it's that source watershed, let's spell it out, it's a source watershed, collects, it stores, and it filters water. And so immediately you're getting a set of services that you could actually factor into your thinking of how you're going to manage water for the city. But in addition to all of that, all those services that natural infrastructure could provide, you also get a bunch of co-benefits. You get food security, you get human well-being, human health, you get climate adaptation and mitigation, and I'll go into that, I promise, really fast, but also biodiversity conservation. Now, you might be thinking now that I'm talking, okay, well, this guy is coming from environmental NGO. We're proposing to, protect and restore nature. That has a huge cost, So the second piece of good news is that actually you can save money by adopting activities and approaches that could restore and protect natural infrastructure. And so we at the Nature Conservancy are about to release very soon a report on that we call the Global Water Atlas. We've run a model across 4,000 cities around the world. And we came to a conclusion that out of those 4,000 cities, 1 in 6, about 700 cities, could actually save all the costs that they will incur into protecting and restoring natural infrastructure in their watersheds. They could they could save all the costs that they will need to actually treat the water. So all the costs that will go naturally into treating water that it's coming with low quality or with with a lot of sediment or nutrients, all those costs could actually be avoided by protecting and restoring water. So you balance out one with the other. The benefits that you get out of that is that a lot of the activities that you're going to be doing to actually protect and restore water have to do with climate adaptation and mitigation. I have a list of things here, and I'm going to go really fast through those. Revegetation, repair and restoration, agricultural best management practices. All of those, in a way, are linked to voluntary markets already, or carbon markets, and have a huge potential. The numbers that I have here out of this study as well, looking at these 4,000 cities, you could actually capture 2.8 gigatons of carbon every year, doing all these kind of interventions on those watersheds, on that natural infrastructure for those 4,000 cities. 10 gigatons of CO2 emissions, equivalent emissions per year. That's a big number, a big achievement. Of course, it will require political will. Now, in terms of financial mechanisms to make that happen, there are multiple examples around the world. I would like to talk about the 3 T's and very briefly. First, T, taxation. We've seen in the city of San Antonio, Texas, in the US, how the government, through referendum, through ballot initiatives from the city dwellers, they have approved to have an increase in their tax that will go into paying back bonds that the city has issued for having the upfront investment on investing on natural infrastructure. That's a tax. The second T is transfers, and that goes a bit to what Steven was saying. You need to find a way in which you can attract private investment, and private investment will invest as long as they know that there is a return. So as long as you can quantify and actually look into each of these cities in which you're intervening and find that possibility of revolving funds coming back to investors that put money in the first place, that is a way of going as well, and so that's the transfers. And the third one is tariffs. And tariffs it's similar to taxation, but it's way more related to the direct use of the money towards natural infrastructure. The government of Peru just last year released a regulation that is already in application that allows for the water utility to actually collect a percentage of the water tariff into the city. That will represent about $50 million in the next 5 years. For Peru, that takes a long way. That amount of money takes a long way for the city. And so that money is going to be invested actually in green infrastructure across the watersheds that are the 3 watersheds that feed into Lima. So I'll stop there. I would love to go back to one of the mechanisms that we at the Nature Conservancy use, that is called water funds, but I'll stop there for now, and then hopefully we'll come back to me at some point.
Thank you very much, Jorge. And again, touching on tariffs, I think a very innovative approach taken in Peru in terms of including the ecosystem services, payment for ecosystem services in tariffs, which is quite innovative. Steven, you also mentioned tariffs and sort of the enabling environment for utilities and cities that may be inhibiting them accessing finance? Now, very practically, what other sort of bottlenecks do you see with water, wastewater utilities, or cities accessing finance? What are the practical, granular problems that they face in terms of accessing that finance?
Well, what I mean, in terms of price, it's tariffs, obviously. Some of the tariffs are quite low, and certainly I think all of us are very much supportive of tariffs being affordable to those who need the basic services. But often the tariff structures are such that it's really the largest share of the tariff subsidy is going to the wealthier rather than the poor, and so there's a need to realign those quite a bit. And then it's just the basic effective management of the utilities. In many cases, I mean, we just need to work to help the utilities operate much more effectively, whether it's huge non-revenue water losses, leakages, etc. That anyone who's looking to invest, whether it's a public support or private support, wants to invest in something that will show results. And if you have a utility that has 30-40% water losses, plus another 20-30% problem on collections, that's a pretty leaky system from both a water and a financial perspective. So it's really those two, of having a well-managed utility and working with them to take that forward, and then really having a tariff structure that protects the access of the poor to water services, and while at the same time recovering the funds necessary to invest in both the service itself as well as the environmental aspects of water.
Excellent. And I'll come back to Jorge to listen a little bit more about the trust funds. And we've mentioned private financing, and maybe Lance, moving on to you. The Carbon Disclosure Project works with cities, with companies, with investors. What are cities reporting in regards to water? What are private investors looking at when they're looking at city water management issues, for example?
Sure, and thank you very much. Thank you for coming today. So I work with CDP. We used to be known as the Carbon Disclosure Project. We rebranded a couple of years ago because we expanded beyond working on carbon footprinting of companies to work on a whole range of other energy issues, water, and deforestation. So we also work with cities. That's been a recent area of expansion in the past few years. We've had a big uptick in city reporting on our platform. Last year we had a little over 300 cities reporting to CDP. That's around the world, developed and developing countries. This past year we had over 500 cities reporting to CDP. So there's, and this is voluntary reporting, so there's clear demand on the part of cities to try to capture, aggregate this information, begin to look at benchmarking and the ways in which they can share that. And so what we're hearing from the annual disclosure cycle, a couple of facts that have come out of the recent report. So in general, cities have identified, over 1,000 broader types of economic opportunities that may be related to climate change. These are things that they're seeing where they believe that with the right action, the right intervention, they could be doing things to mitigate climate change, to better, improve resiliency in their cities, and in ways that would have positive economic impacts. We also see that cities have reported that implementing waste prevention policies and programs were reported among the top 5 actions that cities can take, also in a way tied to reducing their GHG emissions. And 184 of those cities reported they're actually doing so right now. And their estimate is about 6.4 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent being reduced as a result of that. A lot of cities also reported risks to their water supply. 61% of cities reported that. And as we collect the data, we try to look and ask the cities to project out on timescales and different frames to get a sense as to what that risk might look like. And so in response to that identified risk, cities are actually seeking investment in water supply infrastructure, stormwater management, watershed preservation, diversifying their water supply. So a lot of this information coming out to give a sense as to where the wind may be going in terms of investment opportunities. The real big theme, though, coming out of this year's report were that cities are actively looking to partner with the private sector, with investors and others to take action on climate change. This year, cities identified 720 climate change related projects that they believe they'd like to pursue. It's worth a combined $26 billion US. And they're interested in working with businesses and investors to try to tackle those problems. And we found that cities here in Africa, cities in North America and Latin America were the ones showing the greatest appetite, the region showing the greatest appetite for private sector collaboration. Out of those 720 projects, about 25% of those really are focused on water management, on waste management, recycling. And again, these are across the board in developed and developing countries. You've got cities like Quito, Ecuador, looking for $800 million to develop a gravity-fed wastewater recovery system that would allow them to take electric pumps offline, retire that, take the savings from using the electricity and plow that back into other projects. That would reduce the water footprint of Quito dramatically, and would also generate very, very strong emissions reductions. Or you've got a city like Benicia, California, looking for a non-potable water reuse project. They have there's a refiner that's co-located there in the city. They're interested in using that water to help the refinery cool the towers, and that would in turn reduce the city's water needs by 20%, and increase the reliability of water supply to the city. So just a couple of examples of things that are concretely being identified out of the disclosure process. And cities are asking for investors to really, try to work with them to help them understand how to break down the barriers. So there are a lot of barriers. Some of this will have to be publicly financed, but a lot of it is privately financeable, provided that some of the pathways can be clearly identified to helping investors and cities get together on some of those things.
Great, thank you, Lance. Thank you for those examples as well. So we see high demand and momentum from cities to take action on water. Part of the next step there is then actually mobilizing financial resources, public or private, to actually take those actions. And Lorenz, GIZ plays a role in advising countries on the preconditions for gaining access to climate funds. For water and waste, where are you seeing some success for cities or utilities in gaining access to such funds?
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, as GIZ, we are a government-owned organization for capacity development, and as such, it's not on. Is it on? Can you hear me? Sorry, I just heard somebody from the back. So, yeah, capacity development is our job, and we do that for the German government as implementing organization, not only for the German government but also for other financiers, mainly the EU. And what we've learned so far, that there's a strong demand also to prepare countries for the existing financial resources that are available publicly, for the part that cannot finance by the private sector. And we've been working with, I think, more than 40 countries to prepare them for climate finance readiness. We feel that there is a strong demand there, that there are resources available, and that is in our view, a strong, important task as more and more funds become available to access them also in this particular context. Jorge initially already mentioned one example that we work with partner countries to try to tap into the mitigation potential for in this particular case, wastewater treatment and water resources management. That is just one example of many cases where we are actually working together with partners. In this case, this is actually Mexico, Thailand, Peru, and Jordan, where we basically sort of join in exchanging experiences in that particular field, where we feel that there is a lot of untapped potential in this mitigation field, as compared to the adaptation field, where it's much more obvious that that the water plays a crucial and important role. So that, in a nutshell, is what we do in this particular context. There's a lot of other projects that we work on. I think we're working with around 400 water and wastewater utilities, and in that particular field, this issue of mitigation and adaptation relevance becomes more and more relevant and pertinent. And I think in particular with the event 2 days ago on the NDC partnership, this, I think, becomes for us, and with a strong, strong pushing from the German government in this particular field, we are actually required to make this an essential part of whatever we do, that we make sure that this becomes part and parcel of the NDCs in those partner countries.
Thank you very much, Lorenz. And maybe a question to percolate in your mind whilst I go back to Jorge on the water funds issue. Now, what would you see as the no regrets or the low hanging fruit investment options for water and waste? What are the things that we really should be getting on with now in terms of investing to make sure that they can contribute to low carbon climate resilient cities? So I'll let that sit with you and percolate, and I'll go back to Jorge. So these water funds, Jorge, what's in a nutshell, in your 60-second description, what are they? How do they attract investment, and what are their outcomes?
Sure. So trust fund is a financial and governance mechanism. It's a trust fund, privately managed, where you can channel public resources, but also channel private investment. And this mechanism allows for downstream users of water, including both bottling companies, hydropower producers, and cities, to chip in resources into the trust fund. The trust fund then uses those resources into investments on this natural infrastructure restoration and protection that I mentioned before on the upstream level, with a set of partners and actors that are using that water upstream. And so the kind of investments that are done upstream are, I would just chip in on your last question, Tom, are non-regret. Those are activities such as revegetation, as I mentioned before, repair and restoration, agricultural best management practices, fire risk management. Just to give an example, the city of San Antonio, Texas, some years ago had a huge fire outside in the watershed that feeds into the city. The water system in the city got completely clogged and had to be stopped and turned down for 4 days because of the amount of ash that was coming from the fire into the water stream. So there are a lot of non-regret actions that could be done, and the idea of this water fund is to just open up that dialogue and conversation in a structured way and with a very transparent management of resources, so both private and public resources could go in and be invested. And ideally, we hope that some of those resources are creating revolving funds to be paid back for investors. We have a couple of examples in which private investors and impact investors have put money. One of those is in Nairobi in Kenya. There's a water fund in Nairobi that had received impact investment. And down the road, those investments that we're doing upstream will ideally pay back by reducing costs on the downstream users. Thanks.
Thank you, Jorge. So let's revert back to the question I posed to the other three panelists, and starting with Stephen. What's your no regret investment option for waste or water for low carbon climate resilient cities?
Well, I certainly would agree with Jorge. We're moving in that direction with, really integrating the watershed element or the groundwater management as part of that. But another area is and it was alluded to, was the energy side. There's tremendous opportunities for energy efficiency. It's financially interesting. And it also obviously is very important from the carbon perspective. So there are tremendous opportunities to reduce energy consumption in the water sector. It's often overlooked as a key area, although it's been mentioned today. And whether it's in sort of methane capture or something in the wastewater side, or whether it's just energy efficiency, and particularly as we move towards non-conventional sources of water such as desalination and more reuse. These are energy intensive processes. So energy efficiency has to be a focus. We've started to do that much more so in our engagement with the countries we work with, particularly where they're moving towards non-conventional, to really focus on doing energy audits and getting a handle on where the opportunities are for investing in energy efficiency in the water sector.
I think even more critically important as we expand infrastructures to ensure universal access, increase wastewater capacity as well, having that operational energy efficiency in mind at the outset is absolutely critical. Lance, no regret investments for you?
Well, I think efficiency always sort of leaps to mind first, partly because we see so many advantages to that when we talk to companies in the private sector. They're actively working on efficiency. In business, inefficiency is waste. And the more waste you have, the greater the reflection of where you can find efficiencies in your business and therefore save money, reinvest that somewhere else. So, I mean, efficiency seems to be one that's kind of a no-brainer. And then with regard to water, you know, cities, because they're so, they are where they are, to put it mildly, they can't move. They can't go to other places where water may be found. They can't easily bring in new sources of water. So looking for ways to either improve efficiency in the existing infrastructure or to do greater conservation. You know, the famous story about New York City, looking at potentially billions and billions of dollars in bond issuances to expand its water system. And it was found that the best way to assure the quality and quantity of New York City water for future generations was to actually do large preservation purchases in the Hudson Valley and in upstate New York, which had the additional co-benefits of providing parkland and wilderness and all sorts of other things that made a difference. So these are things that in the short term may look expensive, but you know, you never have to fix a leaky watershed. A watershed is always going to be producing clean water if you manage it. And then if you're fixing leaky pipes now, those pipes are going to deliver water for the next 50, 60 years. And that's water savings for that entire period of time. So these are no regrets types of things that make a lot of sense.
Great, thank you, Lance. Very clear. And Lorenz, over to you, your no regret options.
Definitely no regret option for me is for all of those things that have been mentioned already, the right incentive structure. We need the right policy framework to trigger investments that don't lock us into inefficient types of investment. I think that's critically important, and it needs to be looking into. I would also like to stress what Gary talked about earlier, the circular economy. We've been talking about that a lot. We have not been successful enough, and I also don't think we have been radical enough in actually implementing it and making sure that we have the right sequence of things, avoid and reuse, and only then recycle. And then, you know, in this particular order, I think that is important. So again, I could reiterate efficiency, but because I think it's also so important, but also we're talking about efficiency a lot for a long time. I don't think we do enough for it. And I come back to my proper framework argument. I think this is required to actually trigger efficiency.
Great, thank you very much, Lorenz. And I'd like to thank our panelists for their contributions. And just as a way to sum up, this is not the end of this discussion, this topic, this discourse. This is very much the beginning. IWA working with ISWA and OECD on cities, water and waste. This is something that we want to continue in the future and return to COP and other events. But I think it's quite clear from the presentations and the discussion today that there's an opportunity to really tap into this city leadership and this city momentum around climate actions and really present waste and water as an opportunity at that city level to take climate actions forward. Integration, the circular economy, providing an ideal framework to think about that integration is critical. So integrating across sectors, looking at solid waste, water, energy, for example, but also integration across systems. Thirdly, the need to really look beyond cities' boundaries when we talk about water and waste management is important, looking at watershed conservation, natural infrastructure solutions, and how they can give efficiency to actually how you're delivering services. So, as I mentioned, this is just the start of our discussion on this topic. We hope to be back and see you again in the near future somewhere else. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank both OECD and the International Solid Waste Association for working with IWA to bring this side event together. Thank you for your participation. I'm very sorry that we were stuck for time. All these panelists here, they have a long way to walk to get out of the room. So if you have questions for them, then you can obstruct their pathway and make sure that they answer your questions, and you can interrogate them until they scream for help. But thank you for your time. Thank you for your patience, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Exchange cards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You are from... Oh, nice to meet you.